Stewardship is a practice often used in agriculture, and for the dairy industry, it's more than just resource management, but rather a business strategy that improves efficiency and ultimately profitability. Bjerga with the National Milk Producers Federation joins us now for a closer look, so we really appreciate your time this morning, Alan. Now, you all have noted that discussion about agriculture at times treats stewardship and profitability as parallel conversations. Could you expand on that?
And it's frankly not a good thing for either stewardship or profitability to be different constructions, because they really are part and parcel of the same thing. You know, when you're talking a lot about stewardship, a lot of practices in terms of, regenerative agriculture, another term that you use, sustainability, another term that you use, a lot of this is efficiency and productivity and making sure that you make the most of the resources that you have. And I think it's very important as we continue with some of these conversations in the policy area in terms of incentives for farmer practices, as well as just telling the story that needs to be told in agriculture about a lot of the good practices that farmers are doing, that we make sure that stewardship is something that is grounded in economic sense, and ways that really allow farmers to sustain themselves through future generations and some of the things that they do.
And stewardship is kind of a word I feel like is used quite a bit throughout agriculture, and it kind of looks different based on the type of operation that you have. So how do dairy producers use stewardship as a tool for higher profits?
Well, here's an example: manure management, right? If you have precision nutrient application, improved storage, data-driven planning, you get more value from the nutrients that you own. We're having some issues right now with fertilizer supplies, right? If you can replace your purchased fertilizer with managed manure, it reduces your input costs. It stabilizes your yields. These were practices, a lot of these practices at first sort of looked like these environmental obligations that were being pushed down on farmers. But what really ends up happening is it becomes something that the smart farmers, frankly, always knew it would be. It's a balance sheet asset, and it's driven by that improved efficiency you get from adopting these higher quality stewardship practices.
And so it also sounds like it can kind of strengthen export competitiveness, right?
That's huge. When you take a look at export markets right now, and exports are increasingly important for dairy, 1 out of every 6 gallons of milk ends up going overseas. The U.S. market share globally is growing, in part because of the regulatory regimes that are being imposed on producers in, say, New Zealand or the European Union. Well, a lot of global suppliers do ask for things like greenhouse gas emissions. They do ask, what are your sustainability practices? The U.S. and in dairy, we have our farm program, Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. We have a voluntary producer-led initiative that allows best practices to be established, that allow us to be globally competitive. And unlike a lot of countries and competitors where these ideas and practices are imposed from above by a government regulator, we actually have dairy farmers with a strong voice in the process that can talk about what works, not only working on the farm in terms of stewardship, but again, what also works for that bottom line. So it becomes a real competitive advantage for U.S. dairy producers in export markets. And that's a story that we need to be telling.
A story that we need to be telling. I feel like that's a perfect way to wrap it up, and a good conversation to have right now as all of our farmers are dealing with the ag economy that is the way it is right now. So Alan, thank you so much for joining us this morning with that insight. Alan Bjerga with the National Milk Producers Federation.